Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you all. I'm not very familiar with Google Meets or presenting, so if something goes awry at any point in time, please just yell it out or put it in the chat. I can only see myself right now, but I have the chat open. So please, if at any time you have any questions, just let me know. And I'm really excited. We'll go through what sections we're going to be covering as part of our presentation tonight. I will say this is an extremely heavy content session. When I volunteered to do it, I was like, oh, emergency management, easy peasy, I got that. Didn't realize that we had all the categories of service interruption, evacuation of the PSAP in here as well. So there's a lot of ground to cover. So I am going to go quickly. I've tried to condense and make the information as palatable as possible, but there is some highly technical things that come through this. So I'm going to do my best to make it easy to understand. And I've kind of put it together for you in a way that will help you when you're studying. So here's what we're going to go over tonight. And I'll just give you a little bit of background about myself. Thanks, Kate, for the introduction. But for those of you who I don't know, or maybe I haven't met before, it's great to meet you tonight. I'm Sarah Mardus. I work for the Toronto Police Service currently. I've been with Toronto Police since 2012, and I was hired as a telecommunicator, tactical dispatcher, on-desk trainer. I did everything that I could possibly do aside from jumping in as a supervisor when I transitioned into the training unit at Toronto Police. So from 2019 to 2024, I was in our training and recruitment unit, all things training, all things hiring for several years. I was actually responsible for creating our NG training. And then when a position came up to be the coordinator of voice services, it was kind of that perfect transition into the telephony world on a bit of a different level. I received my ENP certification last year. It actually really helped me transition into the role. Kate talks a lot about imposter syndrome. She's done some presentations, and Sharon as well, about that. And I was like, oh, this is 100% how I feel all the time. Especially as I transitioned into a role where I didn't have a technical background, and my skill set is really in training, change management, but that's part and parcel with what's happening in the industry right now. So getting that ENP certification and getting that technical knowledge is really what pushed me over the edge and feeling comfortable in the role. So I'm really happy to see so many of you here and so many of you committed to your learning and to developing your knowledge even further. And then this year, I was elected second vice president to NENA Ontario. So I'm dipping my toes wherever I can. I'm also the co-chair of TIF 83 on ESWG. And I've recently taken over a supervisory role where I oversee all of the switchboard operators at Toronto Police Communications as well. So I've got a lot going on, but the most exciting thing for me right now is helping you all learn some more about resiliency and all the things that come with it. So we're going to get started with contingency and disaster planning. And this section is very important. And I know probably everyone who's presented to you has said something along those lines, but just from remembering my testing, I had a lot of questions on the two sections that we're really going to dive in the deepest with today. So while I was assigned those, I think 6 sections to cover, I've really focused my energy on 2 main sections. And that's because I'm quite certain that you will experience questions on your exam from these sections. So I'm going to go through the sections with you, and then I've put some knowledge checks through the way that we can work on together. So again, if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. So when we're talking about contingency and disaster planning, the emergency operations plan is based on the FEMA concept of integrated emergency management systems. The plan is based on the concept that the response to a disaster requires participation of multiple agencies working towards the same end, restoration of service and recovery of the affected systems. So what is the purpose of the plan? It is to encourage both public safety agencies and communication service providers to incorporate within their own emergency plans all contingencies related to the interruption and restoration of 911 services in the event of a major server failure. So the first thing we're going to look into here is the wheel of emergency management. These 4 sections you will need to know. It's also important to know the order in which they take place and what sort of activities or responses happen within those phases. So from the wheel here, you can see that we have mitigation, which is going to be our first stage. So mitigation, and we're going to break down each section. We're going to go in depth to all 4 of them. But just as a visual, I'm a visual learner. We'll go through the phases on the wheel here, and then we'll dive deeper into each. So mitigation is reducing risk and building resiliency. Always your first stage. Preparedness is our planning, our training, and our exercises. And between preparedness and response is when your situation is going to happen. Situation happens and we switch from preparedness to response. Responses are coordinated actions when this emergency, whatever situation it is, takes place, and then recovery. Recovery is restoring services and improving readiness. And you'll notice it's a wheel. So the cycle is always continuing. Recovery and mitigation, they can happen at the same time. So important to keep that in mind. So diving a little bit deeper into what do each of these categories mean when we look at it in terms of the PSAP and in terms of our scope here. So mitigation, broken down for its definition, are all activities designed to limit the impact of future disasters. Preparedness are activities, should say, geared towards planning and preparing for the emergency. Response are activities designed to restore service to its original level or better. And recovery and mitigation may overlap. And then recovery is activities that respond to, oh, you know what? We've got an error here. I apologize. Under response, it should say activities that respond to the actual emergency, such as fire suppression and rescue. And then recovery is what's under response. I apologize for that. Activities designed to restore service to its original level or better. So we're going to go through each stage, break it down, a general overview, which we've kind of already done, about what is mitigation. And then we're going to go through each of the activities inside each of these parts of the response. So what is mitigation? Obviously, it involves the measures to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to human life and property from natural or man-made disasters. So what are some of those key activities that we're looking at when it comes to mitigation? We're looking at identifying and assessing potential risks and vulnerabilities, implementing policies and measures to reduce the impact of disasters, developing and enforcing building codes and land use planning, investing in infrastructure improvements, and conducting public awareness campaigns. So let's break it down even further. Let's explain what each of those are to really paint that picture of what our mitigating tasks are. So something involved in mitigation might be the implementation of building codes. Governments may enforce and update building codes to ensure structures are designed and constructed to withstand potential hazards, such as earthquakes, floods, hurricanes. Another mitigation strategy is land use planning. Communities engage in effective land use planning to control and regulate land to minimize disaster vulnerability. So this may involve avoiding construction in high-risk areas or establishing buffer zones. Another strategy when it comes to mitigation is infrastructure improvements. So this might include investments that are made in critical infrastructure to enhance resilience after a disaster. So for example, that might be constructing flood barriers or reinforcing bridges, upgrading drainage systems, and then public awareness programs. Mitigation efforts often include public campaigns to educate individuals and communicate about potential risks and the importance of being prepared. This may involve distributing informational materials, conducting workshops, promoting community engagement. This is all part of mitigation. Also involved in mitigation are hazard mapping and risk assessments. So identifying and mapping areas prone to specific hazard helps assess risk levels. This information guides mitigation strategies and resource allocations. Ecosystem management is a big part of mitigation. So preventing and restoring natural ecosystems can contribute to reducing the impact of certain disasters, such as wildfires or flooding. Wetlands, for instance, act as a natural buffer against storm surges. Early warning systems are a mitigation strategy as well. So developing and implementing early warning systems for natural disasters So such as tsunami warning systems or tornado sirens can provide communities with timely information to evacuate or take protective actions. So these are all things we're doing in advance. These are things that we have thought out and planned out ahead of time so that whenever disaster strikes, we're not reactive, we've been proactive in the response to emergency management. Got a few more strategies to get through here. Insurance programs also fall under mitigation. So encouraging and promoting insurance programs that provide coverage against specific hazards can help individuals and businesses recover more efficiently. Community resilience programs. Building community resilience involves fostering strong social networks, enhancing local capabilities, and promoting self-sufficiency, which enable communities to withstand and recover from disasters, as well as research and development. So investing in research to better understand natural and man-made hazards and develop initiative technologies and solutions contribute to us having more effective mitigation strategies. Does anyone have any questions? If you do, just put them in the chat as we go or raise your hand. So mitigation is the pre-planning, the thoughtfulness that goes into really way before it strikes and how to prevent once an event happens. The next phase in the wheel of emergency management is preparedness. So preparedness, this is what focuses on our planning, training, and organizing resources to respond and manage a disaster. So what falls in here? Developing emergency plans and procedures, training, communication and coordination systems, stockpiling, and public awareness campaigns as well. So we're going to go through the same thing. What more specific examples fall into our preparedness cycle here? So again, emergency planning, what does that mean? It's development and implementation of emergency plans that outline specific actions during a disaster. So these include evacuation plans, communication strategies, and coordination mechanisms. Training and drills. So now we're preparing for the disaster, which includes conducting regular training sessions and drills to educate emergency responders, community members, and organizations of their role during the response to a disaster. This helps ensure a coordinated and efficient response. We also have stockpiling of resources. So this is accumulating and maintaining necessary resources such as food, water, medical supplies, ensuring if they're expired that we're replenishing those stocks so that we have them ready to deploy during an emergency. Also falling under preparedness is the establishment of emergency response teams. So we identify and train individuals who will form these response teams. And these teams are not just localized to those who are responding like police, fire, ambulance. It does include first responders, medical personnel, volunteers. It ensures a swift, organized response during a disaster. We're preparing our communication systems. So establishing and testing communication systems to facilitate effective and timely information exchange during an emergency. This includes public alerting systems, two-way radios, and other communication tools as well. Public awareness campaigns, where we're conducting public awareness to educate individuals and communities about potential hazards, the importance of preparedness, and specific actions they should take during a disaster. The development of evacuation plans. So creating and practicing evacuation plans for areas prone to certain hazards, could be hurricanes, flood, wildfires. It includes identifying evacuation routes, shelter locations, and transportation resources. Coordination with stakeholders also falls under preparedness. So establishing partnerships and coordination mechanisms with local, regional, and national emergency management agencies, non-governmental organizations, and community groups, as well as technology integrations. So we're incorporating technology such as emergency notification apps, GIS mapping, and social media to enhance communication and coordination during an emergency. Crisis communication protocols are also a part of preparedness. So developing protocols for effective communication with the media and the public during a crisis, including providing accurate and timely information to prevent panic and confusion. Communication systems, so establishing and testing those communication systems. Continuity of operation plans, developing plans that ensure the continuity of essential services and operations for businesses and government agencies after a disaster, as well as regular reviews of these plans and updating them. which takes us into response. I find these sections are pretty straightforward in their understanding. The actions that take place, it's I don't want to say common sense, because sometimes it can get a bit confusing of what section, like when we talk about, let's say, the social media or the public awareness campaigns, it talks a little bit about it in mitigation and a little bit about it in preparedness. But just understanding why we're doing it in each helps us. There will be questions that come up on the exam about this step or this specific activity falls under what area of the emergency response, and it will give you the 4, and you have to pick which one it fits best with. We'll do some examples afterwards, but some can get a little tricky because they kind of overlap into more than one. So we'll go through those as well. But our next stage here is response. So response is the immediate and coordinated effort to deal with the disaster once it's happened, to protect lives and to protect property. Our key activities here: we're activating emergency response plans and teams. So all the planning and the training that we are done, now we're activating those plans and putting them into action. Conducting search and rescue operations, providing emergency medical care and shelter, coordinating with local, regional, and national agencies, communicating timely and accurate information to the public, and restoring essential services and infrastructure. So again, we'll just go through some of these in a bit more detail. Activation of emergency plans. Emergency plans, we have to activate them to ensure a rapid and organized response to the disaster. This includes mobilizing response teams, implementing all those communication protocols that we developed, and coordinating resources. Search and rescue operations will begin, deploying trained search and rescue teams to locate and assist individuals trapped, injured, or in danger. Those operations aim to save lives and provide immediate medical care. Evacuations and sheltering will take place as a response, where we have to coordinate the evacuation of affected populations to safe locations, setting up emergency temporary shelters for those displaced by the disaster. And it includes providing essential services such as food, water, medical care at shelters as well. Medical care and triage. So we need to establish medical care facilities providing immediate medical care to survivors. Triage systems are often implemented to prioritize treatment based on the severity of injuries. Evacuation and sheltering. So coordinating the evacuation of affected populations to safe locations. Communication and information sharing. Establishing communication systems to disseminate accurate and timely information to the public, emergency responders, and other stakeholders. This could include public warnings, updates, and instructions. We also have logistic and resource management as an active response. So managing and mobilizing resources, including personnel, equipment, and supplies to support response efforts. Logistics plays a crucial role in ensuring the efficient distribution of resources. Coordination with external agencies, which is collaborating with local, regional, and national agencies, as well as non-governmental organizations and international partners to enhance the overall response capacity and resource availability. We also have firefighting and hazard mitigation. So this is responding to and controlling fires, hazardous material spills, and other environmental threats resulting from the disaster. Firefighting efforts aim to prevent further damage and to protect communities. We also have 4 more left in this area here. So public safety measures. So implementing measures to ensure public safety, such as road closures, traffic management, and establishing safety zones. Helps prevent additional injuries and facilitates emergency response operations. Security and law enforcement comes into play with response. So thinking about keeping law and order, preventing looting, ensuring safety of responders and survivors as well. Damage assessment. So this falls into response as well, where we're conducting rapid assessment of the extent of the damage into the infrastructure, homes, critical facilities. The information guides resource allocation and helps us prioritize response efforts. And then finally, for this section, we have recovery planning initiatives. So initializing initial discussions and planning for the transition from the response phase to the recovery phase. So this includes considerations for long-term recovery efforts. So again, this is immediately as the disasters happened, we're immediately evacuating people, immediately finding shelter, immediately providing food, water, basic supplies, road closures, response to the, let's say it's a fire, we're responding to the fire, And sometimes the lines between response and recovery can get a little bit blurred, but think of the response in the first 24 to 48 hours. We then move into recovery. So recovery involves restoring and reconstructing the community and its infrastructure after the disaster. Returning the community to normal or an improved state is a long-term process. So this is not immediately after. This is after time has passed and we are working to make the community back to what it was. And like the slide says, ideally better, so that every disaster that's encountered is an opportunity to learn. So a lot of what we've done, we will respond, see where there were efficiencies and where things went well and where things did not go well. And that's where it moves back into the mitigation phase. Things we've learned through response and recovery will help us as we move back into mitigation. So for recovery, we'll go through these ones here: infrastructure repair and reconstruction. So initiating projects to repair or rebuild the damaged infrastructure, including roads, bridges, utilities, public buildings. We want to restore services and improve community resilience as well. Damage assessment, so conducting a comprehensive assessment to determine the extent of the damage to infrastructure, homes, the environment. Informs recovery planning and resource allocation as well. Economic recovery falls under this section as well, supporting businesses affected by the disaster through financial assistance. Low interest loans and grants. Economic recovery efforts focus on reviving local economies and employment opportunities. We also have housing recovery, so implementing programs to address housing needs for individuals and families displaced or left homeless by the disaster. This may include temporary shelters, rebuilding homes, or providing housing assistance. Environmental restoration includes implementing initiatives to restore and rehabilitate the natural environment, such as reforestation, shoreline protection, and hazardous materials cleanups. Healthcare service restoration is reestablishing and enhancing healthcare services to meet the increased demand for medical care that was resulted from the disaster. This includes rebuilding damaged healthcare facilities, ensuring access to essential medical services. Finally, we have education system recovery, so restoring and improving educational facilities that were disrupted by the disaster. This could involve rebuilding of schools, providing educational resources, and supporting students and teachers. We also have long-term planning and policy revisions, so reviewing and updating policies, regulations, land use plans to incorporate lessons learned from the disaster. Long-term planning aims to reduce vulnerability from any future incidents. And then finally, monitoring and evaluations. So continuously monitoring and evaluating the recovery process to assess the effectiveness of interventions, identify areas for improvement, and adjust strategies as needed. Sorry, there we go. So as a very high level visual here, we mitigate, we prepare, an incident takes place, which prompts our response, our recovery, and then the cycle continues. So again, we think of that visual of the wheel and remembering that recovery and mitigation activities may overlap. I'm not going to get too much into this just for the interest of time. So in our book of knowledge, it says that ENP candidates should review the emergency management process as defined by FEMA, noting that there are several excellent courses and materials available. So information can be found. I'll put the link in the chat here. And then there's also the NENA PSAP Operations Committee. They have standards and documents as well. So I will put that in the chat. And this is what that information goes over. I found that when the Book of Knowledge suggests that an ENP candidate go through the links that it provides, there's typically not too much on the exam from those external links. So give it a once over, make sure you've read it, but I wouldn't dedicate too much time to all of the extra reading. Really, the book of knowledge is going to cover what you need to know. Could a question come up from one of those resources? Absolutely, it could. But I don't find that the test was meant to trick you. I think the test was pretty honest. They do a pretty good job at being transparent about what sort of questions you might encounter. So familiarize yourself, but again, don't put too much efforts into that area. The next section from the book of knowledge, we're going to go over, and again, not too in depth, but we're going to just generally talk about hazard analysis. So 911 communication networks are critical, but they are vulnerable to many different types of disruptions. Interruptions can affect a single PSAP, a service provider facility, or the entire public safety communications network. So disruptions may come from natural events, environmental incidents, or human actions, or technology failures. Let's talk about a little bit about what to expect in each of these sort of different types of events. Pretty common, sorry, lost my page here. Pretty common sense when we're talking about natural events. So severe weather, such as floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, wildfires, and any other disasters that can damage infrastructure or prevent staff from reaching the PSAP. When we talk about environmental situations, this can include incidents in the surrounding area, such as aircraft crashes, explosions, hazardous material spills, contamination, water damage, loss of power, loss of telephone service. And then when we get to human-caused events, now these may be intentional or accidental, okay? But they can include arson, vandalism, sabotage, labor disputes, cable cuts, liquid spills on equipment, or network overloads. So any of these hazards can disrupt communications, reduce service capability, or force an evacuation of a PSAP. Conducting a hazard and vulnerability analysis helps identify risks and plan mitigation strategies. So the NENA contingency planning hazard and vulnerability analysis operational information document, which I will put into the chat, is also a valuable resource that you can look more into if you wanted. Let me just paste that in there. All systems supporting PSAP operations should be reviewed, including telephony, radio, network infrastructure, power, facility systems. The bottom line is understanding potential hazards allows agencies to strengthen their resilience and maintain service during an emergency. So we need to have plans for any scenario. So based on what we've talked about so far, we've spent about half the time on the emergency management wheel. We're going to do a quick knowledge check. I think I've got about 5 or 6 multiple choice questions. So I think the easiest way to do it is just throw the letter A, B, C, or D into the chat. I'll give you about 5-ish seconds per question, just to see how you think you're doing here. So first question. The 4 phases of the emergency management cycle in order are. What is the consensus of the group? The in order is what matters here. Lots of B's. B would be correct. Mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. Very good. Next question. Overall roles, authority, and functions are established by the what? We talked about it in the very first slide. Incident command systems, emergency operations center, public safety director, or emergency operations plan. A few more seconds here. If you don't know the answer, just guess. No harm in guessing. I'm not marking the test. Okay, we're split pretty good between A and D. Our answer here is D, emergency operations plan. Next question. What activity is training and exercises an example of? Mitigation, preparedness, response, or recovery. Overwhelmingly B, you are overwhelmingly correct. Good work. And these are exactly the type of questions I encountered on the exam when it came to this section. So really good job. What are activities designed to restore services to its original level, if not better? Yes, D is the correct answer there. Good work. Activities designed to limit the impact of future disasters. Another second or two here in the chat. The answer here is A. So we are designing the system to limit the impact of future disasters. So this one's going to be our mitigation stage. Preparing an SOP to cover loss of service to your PSAP in a disaster should occur in what stage of our emergency operations plan? So developing SOPs is policies, so standard operating procedures. So the answer is actually D, preparedness. Remembering the words from the wheel. Sometimes what the test will do is throw words at you that are not part of our 4 stages of the wheel. So just be careful there. And then last question. What are the 4 phases of disaster planning as defined by FEMA? Notice how it doesn't say in order on this one. So when I was taking the practice test that I was doing, some would say in order, some would not. So don't necessarily focus on the in order for this one. Focus on the 4 words that we're looking for. Yes, and the word that got us in the last one was planning. So we've got mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. Yeah, A and D actually are the same. That's funny. Okay, but if you answered either, you're good. All right, so that's our very high-level overview on emergency management. Hopefully the information in the slides that you can look over and give yourself those examples and familiarize yourself more with what to expect in each stage. Does anyone have any questions on that so far? Awesome. All right. Now, the categories of service interruption, I'm not going to lie to you. When I volunteered to do this section, I was like, oh, emergency management, I can totally do that. And in my head, I was thinking, man, I feel bad for whoever has to do this section, not realizing that it was intertwined in my section. So I am going to do my best to break it down for you. I've prepared some visuals that go along with it. I've tried to keep it high level so that we're not over getting too much into the technical talk. It is a technical section, so we have to have some sort of understanding, but if you have any questions, please jot in the chat. If you are a technical person and I am saying something incorrectly, also put that in the chat, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm an expert, but I'm very good at trying to interpret what I think it is. Now, before we get into it, I will also say that this section is heavy on legacy. All of these failure scenarios that we're going to go through are all part of legacy E911 networking. This has nothing to do with NG911. So when I did my test at the beginning of 2025, all these questions were still on it. I think I had multiple questions from this specific section on my exam. So knowing these is important. And we're going to go through each one of them, and it's going to get confusing. What I did at the end is create a chart that said, what is your service interruption? What does it look like? And what do you lose? Or what's the effect? So I'm going to try to break it down as best I can for you. I would suggest if you're making your own notes that this is definitely a section to focus on and to really understand. I also did another knowledge check at the end. I remember the first time I did the questions on these, I think I got all of them wrong. I was so overwhelmed. So because you have the slides, I would suggest saving them and then checking your knowledge again after you read and study those different disruptions and see if you're catching on to what they're looking for. So first, we're going to talk about the different types of routing. Now, again, I believe we touch a little bit on some NG routing and PRR sort of things here, but again, some of it is going to be more from our E911 days. But first, let's talk about alternative or overflow and contingency routing. So 911 call rerouting features. Many 911 networks include built-in routing options to ensure calls are answered during overloads, outages, and failures. So this we talk about a lot when we talk about NG. So when we talk about priority routing rules, or PRR, if you've heard it, if you've been involved in onboarding or you're involved in your NG 911 transition, that's something that is built into the testing. The network now allows that no call should be going ring, no answer. No call should be getting a busy tone. You have options for if your PSAP has failed or if you have outdone the capacity of your PSAP, that automatically those calls will fall to an alternate partner or an overflow partner. So primary routing methods includes alternate or overflow, contingency routing, and default routing. And these features may help maintain service continuity and protect public access in emergencies. So we don't want the public to ever be without 911. So what is alternate or overflow routing? It redirects calls when all 911 circuits to a PSAP are busy. So the key points here are it activates automatically when the trunks are overloaded or the SIP sessions are overloaded. So let's say PSAP 1 can take in 50 911 calls. When the 51st call comes in, there's already automatic routing set in place that it will fall to an alternate PSAP. We don't have to call anybody and reroute lines. There's nothing we need to do. It's an automatic step here. The preferred destination is another PSAP. If you have 911 calls, they should go to another 911 center capable of handling 911 calls. Other possible destinations are your 10-digit backdoor emergency numbers. So you could overflow to those trunks. You could overflow to a recorded announcement as well. And you could also overflow to a fast busy signal. So the option is there to overflow to another PSAP, but that's something that requires an MOU. That's something that requires an agreement for another PSAP to say, hey, sure, we'll be your partner and take your calls if you go over. Now, I work in Toronto where we take, I think in 2024, we took over 2 million calls in our small geographical area that we have. It's not easy to find a partner who will say, hey, yeah, for sure, we'd love to take any extra calls Toronto doesn't want to take. So it's really key to establish those connections and set these up in advance. Why do we do it? It ensures that calls are answered when call volume exceeds capacity. I've had my PSAPs exceeded capacity before. In Toronto, we've had, it could just be a flood that causes it. The Don Valley Parkway, if you're familiar, there's the Don River that runs alongside it. So again, that's a natural weather event that could cause a surge of calls to the PSAP. But we also had the van attack on Yonge Street. We had a massive shooting on Danforth that caused a surge of calls where we're going over capacity. So having that alternate overflow routing set up ensures that no 911 call is going unanswered. Contingency routing. It redirects calls when a PSAP cannot receive or process calls. So this is not we have too many calls and our lines can't take the capacity. This is there's something where the PSAP cannot receive the calls. It may be initiated by PSAP personnel or the telephony company. So maybe the PSAP is putting themselves out of service for whatever reason. We'll talk a little bit about that more. Or there's an issue on the telephony side. So this could be due to a planned outage. You need to move facilities. Another PSAP is going to take your calls. So your PSAP is out of service, local equipment failure, a power failure, or evictions or building emergencies. How is contingency routing activated? PSAP creates a all circuits busy condition, typically done by a make busy switch. I've seen a lot of that. We have one in our system as well. We can make our PSAP busy and it notifies as the calls are coming in that the PSAP is not available. And then these calls also automatically reroute to a predetermined PSAP, okay? Emergency reroutes usually require coordination with the telephone companies. In an E911 environment, definitely, especially if we're still dealing with T1s and trunks and copper wires, that requires a manual reroute from your telephony company, for us, Bell. But now that we're on NG, that is all set up in advance. If we're making our PSAP busy, those calls are automatically routing to partners that we've pre-established and that Bell has already set that routing in place, that when they receive a busy or signal from our PSAP, that they know where the calls need to go. Manual translation changes may be required in extreme situations, and manual reroutes can be time consuming. I'm sure you've all dealt with, I mean, I hope you haven't, having to evacuate a PSAP before, and the time it takes for your company to reroute the lines to your partner to get established at the site and reroute back. Now on an NG environment, you make your PSAP busy, the calls automatically go somewhere else, and as soon as you're at the secondary PSAP to start working again, you log in and the calls are automatically there. So the benefits here, calls can be redirected to destinations beyond the present overflow PSAP when coordinated manually. Default routing is a little bit different. So default routing is a fallback routing method used when any or selective routing functionality fails. So calls are routed based on the trunk group, and it uses the originating central or end office serving the caller. So it provides basic call routing when location-based routing is unavailable. So default routing, let's say my PSAP is unavailable for whatever reason, and on the, let's say the Bell side, they have an issue. Their calls they have a default partner in place to deliver the calls to could be Nordia, could be Northern 911. And that is the default PSAP that will answer those calls when it can't access the ANI to say, oh, this call should go to Toronto. So if it doesn't know where the call should go for whatever reason because of an ANI failure or selective router failure, there is a default PSAP set up for every ILEC who is going to say, I'm working with them, and they will answer the call. So if you are getting calls from the, what do we have? The National Answering Service or Northern, and your calls are not coming directly from the caller and you have no ANI, that could be an indication that default routing has been initiated. How do we plan for service interruptions? So these will happen. I find on NG, we're working on a much more reliable network, and we have systems set up in advance. I think that's a really great benefit. The redundancy is huge. The overflow is huge. But for those still on E911, emergency operation plan should identify events that may require rerouting. So we need to have this thought out in advance and plans for how to deal with it when it happens. Equipment failure. If your equipment fails, what are we doing? And how quickly can we do it? And who do we notify? Power outages, network disruptions, facility evacuations, planned maintenance or upgrades. We need to document procedures, contacts, and ensure rapid activation is available. It's part of our emergency management as well. It's why the two kind of go part and parcel. Ooh, good question. Is the National Answering Service operated by government or a telco? I don't know the answer, but I'm going to find out for you. I want to say a telco, but let me find out. Good question. So this is really the meat and potatoes of this section. We're going to go through all of these different scenarios of service interruption, and hopefully it makes sense. Let's start with understanding the components. And again, this is all E911. I don't know when will the exam switch to, in the book of knowledge, switch to more NG focused failures? I don't know. But I think especially in the States, the number of PSAPs still on a legacy system is much higher. So I think this is much more relevant to them still. But let's talk about what is a central office and what is an end office. If you would just put in the chat if what you're seeing on your screen with just a yes or a no is something that you're familiar with. So just so I have like a baseline. Yes, I know what a central office, end office is. No, I've never heard of that before. Okay. See a couple yeses, couple no's. I was a no when I started here. I had an idea because I knew that we had 2 central offices at my PSAP when we were still on legacy, but let's go through. I'll try to explain what each is. If any of you are more of an expert and can break something down that I'm totally saying wrong, please just either put it in the chat or jump in. But when we're talking about an end office, so the diagram here kind of depicts a very high level of how the call flow comes to be and comes to end up at the PSAP. The caller, and I don't know why I chose a landline for my diagram, but I went with it. So we've got the call that comes into 911. Based on the location, we'll go to the end office. The end office will interpret the central office that call should deliver to, and the central office is where the delivery of the call goes to the PSAP. There's a few more things that we'll add into the diagrams as we go, but your end office, it connects telephone customers to the 911 network. It does not connect directly to the PSAP. So your end office and your PSAP do not touch. There should be a central office, a selective router in between your end office and your PSAP. It routes calls through intermediate network elements, and it's responsible for the initial handling and routing of the call within the telephone network. But it relies on subsequent stages in the network to ultimately connect the call to the PSAP. So getting the call to the 911 network, that's the job of the end office. Getting the call to the PSAP, there's a few more steps along the way. The central office is part of the network routing path to the PSAP. In this section, we're going to talk about loss, and we're going to talk about isolation. So it's important to understand how the loss of something and the isolation of something differ. So when we're talking about isolation, isolation refers to a scenario where the central office or the end office remains operational. So it can still function, but it becomes disconnected from the broader network. So this means the office cannot communicate with other offices or the central network, although its internal systems may still be functioning. Whereas when we talk about a loss refers to a complete or partial failure of the central office. You might see in my notes, I call it a CO and an endo or an EO. So it could be a partial or complete failure of either office. The failure renders the office non-functional. So it's preventing it from performing its intended operations. While both loss and isolation of a central office or an end office result in service disruptions, loss pertains to a complete operational failure, whereas isolation to a disconnection from the network within potential let me read that sentence again. Whereas isolation refers to a disconnection from the network with potential internal functionality. So I hope that makes sense. We'll break it down even further. I'm trying to go slow growth as we get into everything. So again, isolation, disconnected from the network, internal functions continue. Whereas loss is a total shutdown of the office's operations. It cannot function. So we've got 4 key pieces here. We have isolation of a central office and the loss of a central office, as well as the isolation of an end office and the loss of an end office. So the isolation of a central office, what happens there? Connectivity impacts. So some local operations may continue. We're going to break each of these down even more. This is just an overview to start. Whereas the loss of a central office means broad service impacts across a larger geographical area. The isolation of an end office disconnects local customers from external services, whereas the loss of an end office is a complete loss of service for local customers. How do we recover from these? So from isolation, we need to restore connections, possibly repair physical lines, reconfigure networks. Whereas with loss, we need to repair or replace equipment, restore power, rebuild infrastructure. So then we get into, we've done talking about end office, central office. We also, in all of this mix, are going to talk about the full and loss or partial loss of service to a PSAP. So there's, when we go back to this diagram here, we've got 4 main players, which include the caller, the end office, the central office, and the PSAP. So when we talk about the PSAP, or a full or partial loss of service here, so this occurs when communication links between the serving central office and the PSAP are disrupted. This cause may be equipment failure. It could be network issues or cable cut affecting voice trunks or data circuits. If voice trunks fail, the PSAP cannot receive calls. If data circuits fail, calls may be received, but ALI information may be unavailable. The service provider's ability to reroute calls depends on where the network break has occurred. So pre-arranged agreements, SOPs, and alternate routing plans are essential to remain service continuity with these. Loss of service typically results from a disruption in communication links that prevents calls from reaching the PSAP. So this could stem from network failures, damaged infrastructure, telecommunications outages, and depending on the failure, calls could be rerouted to an alternate PSAP. Personnel, they might need to relocate or activate rerouting procedures. And it just requires rapid coordination with telephone providers and alternate sites to minimize the impact to the public. So what occurs when the PSAP, the loss of a PSAP facility? This occurs when the PSAP is destroyed or severely damaged by natural or human-caused events. We cannot safely continue operations, and we must evacuate due to threat or hazardous conditions. The loss of PSAP refers to the total inability of the center to operate, whether due to catastrophic damage, system failure, or prolonged evacuation. Emergency call handling must be immediately transferred to a designated backup PSAP. This may require relocation of staff, equipment, and dispatch functions. Administrative and non-emergency lines should also be forwarded to maintain communications, and recovery planning should include timelines and procedures for restoring those operations as well. When we talk about the isolation of an end office, so this occurs when communication links between the end office and the tandem switch or selective router are broken. So what are the impacts here? Calls from the affected area will not reach the PSAP. Telecommunicators may need to relocate to the isolated office. I remember talking about this in our study group. I don't think I've ever heard of that happening before. If you have, you can throw it in the chat. More than likely what would happen would be that calls would be directed to a 7-digit number instead of delivering over 911, which would mean if we're transferring calls via that backdoor emergency number, we're not having any ALI coming through with that. So isolation occurs when connection to the server or selective router is severed. Calls from that service area will not reach the PSAP through our normal routing. So this is isolation of the end office. If we have an isolation of the central office, what happens here is it occurs when links between the central office, PSAP, and the broader network are interrupted. Calls from within the affected area or within the affected central office area may still connect locally, but calls from outside the area will not reach the PSAP. Calls may be redirected to a 7-digit number as well, and any ALI information is still not available. Central office boundaries may not align with your jurisdictional boundaries, so that's important to know. And this could also complicate call handling. So agencies must activate emergency reporting procedures and relocate personnel if needed. And what if we lose a central office? So this is our central office has been isolated. And what if, remember the difference between loss and isolation. So with isolation, operations could still continue. It could be through the 10-digit number that's transferring the calls in. But when we talk about a loss of a central office, the loss of a central office occurs when switching equipment fails due to malfunction, fire, flooding, or other damage. This results in the loss of all telephone services, including 911 for the affected area. So wireless calls may still be possible, but may route to alternate PSAPs if the local PSAP is affected. So agencies must implement alternate communication methods and public notification strategies. Restoration may take minutes or several days, depending on the severity here. And I'm not sure if Kate is still on the call, but when I'm sure all of this was written, things like over-the-top applications are not part of our contingency plans here. But I guess I'm plugging Rapid SOS, but that's something that in the event of these sort of failures, if you had some sort of over-the-top application, you would still have access to some of that information coming in. But just to understand the loss of a central office, what would happen, and that alternate routing is now having to take place. What happens if you have a loss of tandem switch or selective router? So this failure of a tandem switch or selective router disrupts call routing and ANI delivery. So calls may default route based on trunk groups, potentially sending calls to the wrong PSAP. So again, if they are not able to have ANI delivery, then the call doesn't know where to route. So that's where we talked about those default routing. That's where the telco says, I can't reach Toronto. I don't know if the call is supposed to go to Toronto, so I'm going to send it to Northern 911. Northern 911 will speak to the caller and say, where is your emergency? And then those calls will be transferred through that way potentially. And that's why we're getting calls going to the wrong place. Features such as selective routing, transfers, and alley functions may be unavailable. Redundant geographical diverse routers can reduce system vulnerability, and telecommunicators should follow your procedures for call handling until routing is restored. The last few here I don't have fancy pictures for, but when we talk about the loss of a database management system, so this results in the inability to provide current alley location information. So calls can continue to be received, but newly created or updated address data may be unavailable. So if you're doing any rebids, telecommunicators must verify caller location verbally and may request manual alley retriever from the service provider. Backup databases or printed records can support operations during extended outages. As well, we have a loss of the alley node, so alley node failures. So failure of an alley node can prevent location data from displaying with 911 calls and may affect call routing accuracy. If multiple nodes are deployed, the impact may be minimal. Single node systems may lose alley entirely. Data link failures between alley nodes and PSAPs can also disrupt query capabilities. Telecommunicators must confirm caller location and may obtain alley manually when necessary. Having redundant, geographically diverse alley circuits and nodes improves system resilience. And again, as we switch to NG, a lot of these scenarios go out the window. But this is where we are. So to help you remember all of these things, I'm going to give you a study tip. So I've put all of those scenarios here. You have the situation of what happened, or sorry, you have the situation, you have what happened, and now you have what's affected. So what I did for my studying is I'm a big cue card person. So what I would do, I would put the full or partial loss of service to a PSAP on the front of the card. I would put the what happened and the what's affected on the back of the card. So that was my way of knowing each of these various scenarios. And I also would print out the little pictures, the flow charts of what that all looked like, where the break in the link was, to help me visualize, since I'm a visual learner, where the break was and how that would affect the PSAP and the delivery there. So we're going to go into the knowledge check. If you don't do well, that's okay. This is an area, if I were you, that I would focus a lot of my time and efforts on understanding. Like I said, I think I had 3 or 4 questions pertaining to the different types of loss or isolation ofs. So when it comes to those technical questions, this is a good area to study from. So let's jump in. We'll put all our answers in the chat again. The loss of a selective router will cause the following issue or issues to a PSAP. What do we think? B is the correct answer. I saw the first in the chat and it's the right answer. So yes, the loss of a selective router will cause loss of ANI and call routing services. We're going to go through them quickly. I'm glad that you'll have these to kind of go over for yourself as well. When 911 calls are directed to a 7-digit number, they will not route through the 911 tandem switch and will not have ANI or ALI. This is known as what type of service interruption? Some of these are tricky because a lot of them have multiple routing via a 7-digit number comes up in a few different things that we talked about. And again, these questions are not meant to trick you. A is a good guess, but it's not the right one. We're close, but we're not there yet. No, no. Try the other letter we haven't guessed yet. C. Yeah. So this one is C, the isolation of the central office. So calls will not route through your 911 tandem switch. That's what connects us to the PSAP, right? The central office is how it switches to the PSAP. So when that's gone, it's been isolated, not lost, because it can still get to the PSAP, but in a different route. So it's been isolated. Good try, everybody. Hopefully this is not indicative of my teaching skills. All right, the communications equipment in this telephone office has been damaged and is unable to process calls. So not connect calls to the 911 network, but it can't get the calls to the PSAP. A is the right answer. Good job. What occurs when there is a break in the communications network between the serving central office and the PSAP? These are tough, I know. That's where this this chart is going to be super helpful. So a break, there's a break in communication. That means all those wires with the pictures I shared, it's not like anything's been isolated. There's a full break. Calls cannot reach the PSAP. This could be a full or partial loss of service to the PSAP. So that's where we're going to go with A. A lot of the times, the answer to the question is built into the question. My advice, again, is to reread the questions more than once, especially if you see it and you think you know the answer, read it again, because a lot of the times what you're looking for is in there. And sometimes it seems obvious, but sometimes it's not. The end result is loss of up-to-date ALI records being available to the PSAP. Loss of up-to-date records. Yeah, good job, Cynthia. C is the correct answer. C, there we go. Good job, everyone. Woohoo. This may result in improperly routed calls in addition to the lack of ALI with a 911 call. Lack of something. Calls might not end up in the right place. ALI is important. If we don't have ALI, how do calls get to the right place? This one we're looking for D, loss of the ALI node. It says mode, it should say node. It was not a trick to have you see the wrong word there, I promise. Occurs when communication links between this office and the remainder of the 911 network are interrupted. The 911 network. In which office do we talk about connecting to the 911 network? Think of the diagram. We've got the phone, and then there's a building that connects us to the 911 network. It's not C. It's not A. So we've got our phone call, we've got our end office, we've got our central office, and then we have the PSAP. Answer is D. D for isolation of the end office. Remember, the end office is what's connecting us to the 911 network. The facility housing the PSAP is destroyed or so severely damaged that operations of the PSAP are not possible. So we know it's not possible. Things are bad, bad, not good. B, good. Okay, good job, everyone. This is the last question on this section here. The communications equipment in the telephone central office has been damaged and is unable to process calls. Unable to process calls to the PSAP. Can't get the calls to the PSAP. It's not the loss of a PSAP. It's a type of central office. Kind of give you a bit of the answer in the question. This is A, so the loss of the central office. All right, good job, everyone. You all did probably better than I did the first time I tried to answer those questions. So great work, good teamwork. I only have 9 more slides left. I don't even know how I have 9, but we're gonna go through them quickly. More as an overview, I tried to focus most of our energy on the sections I thought mattered most. Maybe just know what TERT is. TERT is the Telecommunicator Emergency Response Task Force, developed by APCO and NENA to support communication centers during a disaster. Large-scale incidents often strain PSAPs and PSAP staffing when call volume increases, while local staff may also be personally impacted. I was at the APCO conference and we had that amazing presentation about the fires, and the people that are staffing the PSAP are often the people who are the victims of the disaster as well. So TERT is an organization that provides trained telecommunicators who can be rapidly deployed to assist with overwhelm centers. Beyond staffing support, TERT recognizes the emotional and physical impacts of the disaster, supports the people beyond the headset. I'm going to go through these ones quickly, talking about the evacuation of a PSAP. So a PSAP evacuation may be required for various reasons: fire, hazardous materials, structural damage, security threats. The important thing is to have continuity of operations. So that requires us to do advanced planning, backup facilities, relocation procedures, communication protocols. NENA standards and disaster contingency planning guidance provide best practices for these sort of processes. Planning may include designated emergency contact, leadership roles, what are our backup systems and our redundancies, alternate facilities or standby operations, and full relocation procedures. So your plan should align with your organizational needs and the resources you reasonably have available in your area. And there's some additional resources there as well. The final thing we'll talk about is the loss of a trunked radio system. I'm not an expert in radios. I'm more focused on telephony, but when we talk about a trunked radio system, systems may enter something called site trunking, and this is when a site loses connection to the network core but continues local communications. So in this mode, users affected with that site can communicate locally but cannot communicate with other sites. I'm also just warning you that my family is about to walk in my front door, so if you hear little children or an adult, man, child, that's them, I'm sorry. A more severe condition called fail-soft occurs when controller systems fail and the site operates as a conventional repeater. I'm hoping you guys have gone through the radio section. I think Amanda Haynes did that. Probably, was it week 1 or 2? This is rare and it's considered a last resort mode. Site trunking is more common and may result from backhaul failures such as fiber cuts or microwave interferences. Telecommunicators and responders must recognize these modes and follow procedures to maintain communications and operational awareness. Finally, we'll talk about emergency management guidelines for Canada. We're guided by federal framework and supported by provincial and territorial emergency management organizations. So the Federal Emergency Management Planning Guide outlines a structured approach aligned with the 4 pillars of emergency management. While emergency management acts provide a national framework, implementation is led regionally. We have provincial and territorial EMOs offering training, planning support, and hazard analysis, and disaster assistance coordination. Understanding these resources helps PSAPs align with planning and regional risks and strengthens preparedness. And that's all I have for you guys tonight. I kind of know that I sped through some other sections and focused more on the ones I know you will for sure see. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining tonight.